writers group this year, and some of them do short stories, some of them do poetry. And when he sent me the PDF of the book, I printed out the first couple of pages from the first chapter, and it's like they're all sitting there with their mouths open and their eyes. I said, "Oh my gosh, this is so good!" And so he's been one of my big examples for that. So but we're really pleased that Linda and Jason are here because they make such a dynamic duo. And he's just going to be going up on the bestseller list with the likes of Grisham and Patterson and everything else.
Experimentation. In 1928, a Soviet scientist by the name of Sergei Bryukhanenko presented an experiment at an international scientific conference called the Third Congress of the Physiologists of the USSR. He intended to prove that deceased organisms could be revived, including the brain. Bryukhanenko conducted the experiments proving that a head could indeed be kept alive by a primitive heart-lung machine and ran extensive tests on the subject. His science, however, has often been questioned. As proof of his experiment, and to show that the head wasn't just part of the corpse, a film was recorded of Bryukhanenko performing a series of tests. He shines a light in the head's eyes, causing it to blink. Then he hits the table with a hammer and the subject's head reacts as well. Finally, he feeds the head a small piece of cheese, which lands on the table at the other end of the esophageal tube. From that day forward, controversy and speculation traveled the world over. Scientists divided into two groups, those who accepted the medical possibility and those who were skeptical. The latter suggested that the film might be pure Soviet propaganda, or simply medically impossible. What is interesting, however, is that many physicians actually gave credit to Bryukhanenko's experiment in scientific journals legitimizing the whole affair. 1. All Jimmy Martinez could hear as he gained consciousness was a methodical swish, swish, swish. He opened his eyes and saw only black. His heart began to race. I'm blind. Oh God, no, I'm blind. Jimmy's head was pounding, making it nearly impossible to think clearly. What the hell happened last night? He opened his mouth to ask if anyone were there, but words would not come. He realized suddenly that he was cold, icy cold. His legs, arms, and torso were freezing. His body was tingling, half asleep. Where am I? And why is it so cold in here? Blinking back the darkness, Jimmy finally saw a sliver of light. He remembered something, but his head felt heavy, thick. Anniversary? Mojitos? Too much to drink. My beautiful white velvet was so lovely. Can't think. Only pieces and parts. Clarity faded. Jimmy's eyelids grew heavy and he fell back to sleep. Birds chirping, cardinal, swish, swish, swish went the sound. Jimmy slowly, cautiously opened his eyes. A piercing light felt like an ice pick being driven into his head. Damn. His vision cleared a little and he could just make out a blurry form. He squinted, straining to focus. It looked like Elena sitting on a chair. Elena? He tried to say, but no sound. Her name came out mouthed, no words, no breath. He tried to take a deep breath but could not. He felt strange, choked. Jimmy stared at his wife, trying to make her out. The warm light filtered down on her beautifully, and he recognized the gray dress she had been wearing the night before. Her head was cocked sweetly to the side. Admiring him? She was wearing a scarf. Was it red? No, so blurry. She is sitting so still. Is she asleep? Elena? He mouthed again. His mouth felt dry, parched. Water. He needed water badly. He reached for the end table, but his arms wouldn't move. It was numb, tingling. Jimmy strained to look down at his arm, but his head wouldn't move either. Paralyzed? Am I paralyzed? Panic overcame him. A knocking at the door, followed immediately by the doorbell. Elena, he mouthed again. His vision beginning to clear. His wife looked strange. Elena was not wearing a scarf. The scarf was her bloody throat slit ear to ear. Dear God, no. His beautiful wife gone. She sat facing him. Her head head cocked to one side, covered in blood, staring wide-eyed in his direction. Tears filled his eyes and escaped down his cheeks. My sweet, beautiful Helena. Oh, no, please, God, no. Someone called out to him from far away. Hello? Jimmy? Jimmy, are you home? The voice was muted, distant, disconnected. But Jimmy lay staring in horror and grief at Helena. His sobs were silent, his overwhelming grief finding no outward expression. Who would do such a thing, and why? Why Helena? His mind jumped to their 4-year-old daughter, Chanel, and a bolt of fear shot through him. Chanel, my precious little Chanel, is she alive? Is she safe? The ensuing panic engulfed him. Jimmy's head lay on the pillow, turned sideways. He strained, but could barely make out the door. Jimmy knew the voice that was that of his friend Jeff. He looked at the bottom of his visual plane toward the doorframe, fearing what his friend Jeff was about to encounter as he walked into the room, but was incapable of warning him of the awaiting horror. Jimmy? Jeff inquired tenderly as he stepped through the door. Jimmy watched Jeff stop rigid in his tracks. Jeff looked at Jimmy, then at Ellen, then back to Jimmy. Holy shit, fuck. Jimmy! Jimmy! Jesus Christ, Jimmy! Staring in horror at Jimmy, Jeff's face grew even more ashen than it had been reacting to Helena. Jimmy's thoughts raced out of control. What does he see? What is it? Talk to me, Jeff. You haven't talked to me. Jeff's shocked expression fell quite suddenly to one of morbid grief, his hand flying to his hair and his eyes flooding with tears. Sweet Jesus, he moaned, turning and tripped over a chair as he stumbled from the room. Jeff barely made it to the bathroom before dropping to his knees at the toilet and vomiting. Minutes passed as Jimmy lay there, unable to move, uncertain of exactly what Jeff had seen when he looked Jimmy's way. Something that Jimmy couldn't see, but whatever it was, it had affected him even more than the bloody sight of Jimmy's wife, Helena. Jeff entered the room again with an air of trepidation that was palpable. Jimmy? Jimmy, can you hear me? Jeff asked with the tender concern of a small child. Yes, Jimmy mouthed. Jeff could see Jimmy mouth yes. Holy shit, Jimmy. Fuck. Jeff's chest was heaving up and down as he strove hard for self-control. Stay calm, man. Stay calm, Jimmy. I'll call 911, Jimmy. Tears rolled down Jimmy's face as he was forced to look at the horror of his mutilated dead wife, locked in the blurred frame of his paralyzed view. He closed his eyes hard. Try to concentrate on the night before. Remember your beautiful wife Eleanor and your final night together. Swish, swish, swish went the sound. Minutes passed. From what seemed like far away, Jimmy heard Jeff say, just please, you have to get someone here. Please, hurry. There's not much time. Jimmy heard a door close. Jeff leaving. Darkness overcame him, and he passed out. Detective Stanley Devonshire sat in the kitchen of the colonial house he and his wife Victoria built during their early years of their marriage. Stan and his teenage son, Jonah, were finishing lunch on this idle Saturday when the call came in that there was a multiple homicide on Plymouth Avenue. Devonshire, he answered. Jonah watched as his father responded rather matter-of-factly with, several times. Then suddenly his father's eyes went wide. Whatever the news was, it must be bad. So often Jonah had wished that his father would be like other dads. Go to the office, ride the train home, eat dinner, toss around the ball. Those little things that all other fathers and sons did. But ever since Jonah's mother had died, he found it more difficult to see his father go on fighting crime. Their small town was far from the crime capital of the world, but there were still times Jonah really worried about his father's safety. He remembered his mother's last words as she lay in the hospital after being hit by the car. Jonah had promised her that he would look after his father, something that the then 10-year-old boy had found more difficult than he imagined. Even now, 10 years after his mother's death, Jonah still had difficulty watching his father walk out the door every day. Each time, he couldn't help but wonder if it might be the last time he would see his father. Stan hung up and stared at his son. It's a murder. I have to go. Keene and Roberts are already there. Okay, Jonah said, maintaining his reserve. But Dad? Yeah. Stan answered, snatching his mobile off the table, preparing to leave. Be careful. Stan lowered his chin and shot a glance at his son. Shot a glance at his son as if to say, yeah, right. I'm serious, Dad. The Vic is already dead. What could possibly happen to him? Dad. Okay, I will. Jonah stared back at his father with his mother's deep gray eyes. Eyes so much like his mother's that Stan almost felt like Victoria, could almost feel Victoria looking at him. I promise, son. I'll be careful. Stan reached over and smiling affectionately, tossed his son's brown hair. Then he walked out the door. Officer Keene intercepted Detective Devonshire the second he stepped out of the car. What you got? Stan asked Keene, walking quickly alongside him toward the house. Dead woman, 33 years old, throat slit. Yeah, who found her? Friend of the husband, Jeff Auberge. How bad is it? Bad, Keene said. Real bad. Stan nodded, still not comprehending the gravity of the situation. Throat slit? Yeah, I'd say that's pretty bad. Oh, it's much worse than that, Keene said, walking past him. Stan stopped in his tracks halfway up the drive, looked at Keene. Worse than a woman's throat being cut? Much worse, Keene replied. He now had Stan's full attention. Stan looked around at the dreary day as a light drizzle fell and the cold air chilled the neighborhood. An ambulance sat parked in the driveway, radio squawking. A paramedic walked out of the house to grab a bag. Hey, Stan called out. What's the situation? Why are you guys here? I thought it was a dead woman. The paramedic shot some kind of knowing look at him, sighed, and shook his head. He grabbed the bag and put it back inside with Stan in tow. The floor had a piece of plastic laid down between the foyer and the bedroom the CIU had put in place to preserve evidence. Stan's feet made a crinkling sound as he walked atop the plastic sheeting following the EMT. As he approached the bedroom, Stan noticed the paramedic he'd seen earlier and one other EMT standing in the room. At first glance, he saw the woman sheet draped over her own chair. There was something on the bed, but with the two paramedics partially blocking his view, he couldn't make out what it was. Glancing over at the wall, Stan saw a photograph of Jimmy Martinez, his wife Elena, and their little girl, all smiles looking back at him. This is Jimmy's house, he thought, anticipating. Although if he didn't know Jimmy Martinez well, he and Jonah frequented the couple's diner on Paradise Road. Stan stepped around the two EMTs to discover something he couldn't have imagined. A head, sitting on the pillow of the bed, tubes coming out of what was left of the neck attached to some kind of machine on the other side of the bed. It was Jimmy, all right. What was left of him, anyway. What bloody hell? He half whispered in shock. Keene shot him a look. Still alive, Keene said softly in Stan's ear. Stan's hand flew to his face, his fingers spread out, clamping his mouth in disbelief. What? No way, not possible. One of the EMTs chimed in, sounding as if he didn't believe his own words. He's being kept alive by this heart bypass machine, an oxygen infuser. Never seen anything like it in my life. Never even imagined it. The EMT paused, shaking his head side to side, still in shock himself. We need to get him to Salem Hospital. We're heading over there in a moment. We just need to secure the machine for transport to make sure what's left of this.
I have a little writing business, and I wrote resumes, and I did a resume for a family member of his. And then I also did a eulogy of sorts. I know this is creepy, but I did. And someone who heard that recommended to Jason that I might be a good editor for his book.
Especially because of the eulogy.
Yeah. Think about it. Yeah. I mean, so that's how we connected, and I edited Rooms of the Writing and now this one. And we're about to start another book.
So that manuscript is pretty, it's all done. I'm just doing some reworking on it. The funny thing is Ruins of the Mind. How many? Very many of you. I know you've read it. Yeah. Or you guys read it. Have you read Ruins of the Mind? No. All right. So a lot of the stories are uplifting, thought-provoking. You know, they're much more mellow and light than this. So I wrote this, and Linda loved it. She was into every story as we're writing it. And then I said, okay, instead of the Truoc, I want to put out a thriller first, because that really seems to be where a lot of the industry, kind of sparks people. And she's like, okay, well, what do you have in mind? And I said, well, there's this book, Steel Bandman, that I've been tossing around for a while. And I said, why don't I write a few chapters and I'll send it your way? And you read the first couple chapters and you're like, I don't know if this. You had a lot of apprehension about it because you're like, a murder book, that's not my thing.
How many times do you encounter a head on a pillow? Not often.
But then it got to the point where every day I'm getting a little Skype message, anyone SBM, and,
But you don't want to read this book at night.
Yes.
Like I did once. Go to sleep.
No, I'm the hokey person. I always, if somebody's getting some real scary book and I'm, being the humorist that's not funny at all, I always say, make sure this is the type of book you have to read with the lights on. And the teenagers and the kids look at you, okay, and then the adults sort of look at you and say, what the heck are you talking about? How else are you going to read without?